What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now. I'm Alex, and here we go. We get to talk about quite a bit of info and just footage of Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. So let me say something. Let me say something just off the jump here. I'm actually kind of impressed by it. I didn't love all of it. We're going to talk about, all of the parts to the gameplay video that they showed. Didn't like, specifically, I'd say I had problems with more of the combat than anything. But I walked out. I mean, I was sitting, I guess, the whole time. I sat out of the entire 20 minutes at the end thinking, you know what? They kind of improved quite a bit, and I feel better about this game. Now, again, there are some warning signs, and I guess another thing to kind of get it out of the way, I know one of the first things that so many people would say, right, is either comparing it to Arkham or games like that. I'm genuine here. I'm really trying to look at this game for what it's trying to be. And it might not be the best that it's trying to be, but I'm really trying to look at it as they want to be a certain thing. Clearly, they are not going, obviously, right? And we've known that for years now, but they're not going for the Arkham style. And so to keep saying it, like, yeah, you can not like it. I respect that if you respect me. But I'm going to kind of throw that out, at least in these discussions, right? Just because we already know that, okay? So let's talk about it. Honestly, from the story perspective and the characters, I like it. I actually think it has some potential. Now, I do think there's a reason why. I mean, it's story and gameplay, right? Almost 20 minutes long, and gameplay was roughly 4 or 5 minutes of that 20, okay? So about 15 minutes was more on the story, was more on the characters, and the movement, getting from point A to point B. That was 75% of this, and 25% was the fighting. And I think that's kind of a sign because, as I said, I think the characters actually gel rather well. Now, you're not going to know that fully until you play the whole game, right? How they're going to interact with the Justice League. We see a little bit of that, right, with Green Lantern and even the Flash. In fact, it's actually kind of cool that they showed us that one because that was the Flash before he was corrupted or, whatever you want to call it. So we got a little insight into that as well. And I mean, they kind of just showed us a full-on mission, right? At least, and it seemed early because they got the traversal items, basically, right? So that's probably mission 1 or 2, maybe not like right away in the game, but that's probably very early on in the game is what they showed us. But I think that can work, and I think there's a lot of people still holding on hope, whether you like the gameplay or don't like the gameplay, I think a lot of people, regardless, have held on hope that, these are the people that made some really good story games, and they could probably do it again. Even though, people have left or people are leaving, I personally think they can do it. I think a lot of other people, they think they can do it, and what we've seen so far, yeah, I'm willing to give it a shot. I really am. I think it can be a pretty good overall story, and it's important to throw out early on in this video, they say that the story is the core of this game. Actually, later on, they say the traversal is. So it seems like gameplay is kind of like dead last, which is, again, interesting. But they specifically said, I think the heart of the game is traversal. But then early on, they said story-centric. Now, how story-centric, considering the Battle Pass, obviously that's been something that's kind of come out afterwards. And that has upset people. And I guess we'll get there. I kind of want to just throw that out there. We'll hold it out there, and I'll get back to it as the video goes on. But from the visuals of the story, the visuals of Metropolis, too, like the city actually looks really, really good. I'm, happy with the story and the character section that we got of this gameplay, segment. Okay, so next up, I want to talk about the movement because that was a huge part of this thing, and they actually showed it quite a bit. They showed them going from point A to getting the Penguin, right? And they really took their time. They really let, all 4 of them and kept swapping the screens, right? And we could see them. And I actually really liked it. I wonder if it'll get boring or if it'll get old. Like, that is, I guess, my concern. But, you think of movement in the Arkham games. You think of movement in Spider-Man. You think of movement in really any of these superhero games. There is some repetitiveness in it. And I guess the thing that all of them have that are successful is the hook, right? And not like a literal hook, but there's always something at the very core of the movement that is fun. And I will say, and I believe I've said this before, I probably have, maybe when they first showed the gameplay, it reminds me, and if done right, it reminds me of Sunset Overdrive. Now, not entirely, and obviously Sunset Overdrive really laid the foundation for what would then be Spider-Man, right? But when I look at their movement and them sliding, like it showed Harley sliding on the sidewalk or whatever. I think it showed them kind of going down some buildings too and sliding, and just the way that they move and they keep using these abilities. Boomerang, he throws it and he appears there and then he runs up the wall. It feels very floaty, but in a good way. And I mean, it's tough too because you can't really judge that stuff until you touch it yourself. Honestly, I mean, when it comes to movement of characters, it can look one way and then play a different way because just that feel is different. But if I'm just judging it based off its looks right now, which I am, I would say it actually reminded me quite a bit of Sunset Overdrive. And the reason I bring that up, fun, like it's enjoyable to get from point A to point B. And that's something that I think I do remember comparing it to Sunset Overdrive before, so maybe I've always kind of liked the movement in it, but it kind of reminded me like, oh yeah, the thing that I really don't like about this game is only the gun stuff. It's maybe not anything else, and it did. Like it brought that back up in my head. So let's get into that. Honestly, I'd say 60, 70, 75% of this thing I quite enjoyed, and I feel somewhat confident that it can be at least solid. And I think a lot of people, maybe I'm reading the room wrong, but I do think people believe that this thing could be solid. The gun stuff, okay? Again, I really think, and although they said episode 2 is also going to be the combat, I think there's a reason why they led the way that they did, why they put combat at the end of this video, why combat was 4 to 5 minutes, whereas everything else was 15. I think they did that for a reason, and it's because the combat really still doesn't look all that good. And, I mean, I do think it looks better. And I think one thing I thought of, it was when they first started the combat. I think Harley was hanging on to the grapple line and shooting down. And in that moment, watching it, I thought, okay, that's where the combat can be good. That's probably the only place the combat could be good because as they kept going, it's like, the characters, they're all diverse in the way that they get from point A to point B. But in terms of the fighting stuff, it's like, well, they all use the same gun. Now, they say which characters are better with certain guns, but I assume you're going to be able to use whatever gun for whatever character, which really takes away any and all personality. Now, they have their own individual moves. They talked about that, which to me sounds like finishers. They sound like they have individual, unique finishers, and they also kind of have close-up attacks where, like Deadshot will use the wrist cannons or whatever. Harley's got the bat. King Shark does, like, the explosion drop thing, right? So, like, they each have their own unique thing like that, and then they have like a finisher move. But beyond that, it is all the same regardless, and that is where I think the game kind of falls apart. Now, it depends. I mean, because again, it's hard to judge when we're playing it with friends. Say you're playing it with 3 other people. Maybe it's fine. But and I'm not saying it's like garbage looking. It's just very clearly not like up to standard, I guess. Maybe with other superhero games, it's also just not up to standard in the way I'm looking at it with its own game. It looks literally like the weakest thing in this game. But, not to go too negative, I guess, too fast. Truly, going back to that Harley thing, that's where I thought, okay, if the and it is, I mean, they talked about it. If the combat is tied so directly to movement, perhaps it can still be good. And I think I really do. I think it's possible because it depends on which character you're playing. So if you're playing with Deadshot and you're doing your jetpack, like you're going to, although you're using like the same weaponry, you're going to be handling a situation different than say Harley. Harley is very kind of all over the place, right? Which suits her personality, right? She's flinging around, she's doing all these somersaults, and she's holding with the grapple, and then she's firing down. Boomerang is very quick, but almost like in a teleporting way, right? So I think the movement, not only was I, again, like impressed by it, but I think combining it with the combat, I feel like there's a chance. Again, just to throw this out here, combat's another one that is hard. Like, it can look good or bad, but it also depends on, like, when you play. I always go to Guardians of the Galaxy, right? Marvel's, when they did Guardians of the Galaxy, that game is phenomenal. And the combat, to me, always looked bad. Always. And that's the first thing I said about the game when we first saw it. The combat doesn't look good. Playing it, I think the combat's actually really good. So, I mean, that's an example of it looks bad and then it is good. It could be the reverse, or it could also be it looks bad, it is bad. That is totally possible. So I'm not saying like, oh, well, you can't judge it literally at all. You can't say it looks. No, you can say definitely like it doesn't look good, but there is a shot, there is a chance that it's not actually going to be bad. And I don't know, like that's just something that I feel the tone is going to have to be set where again, playing it with friends might help it. Depends on like the boss. Like they mentioned the boss battles, right, being so epic and like the greatest thing they've ever made. That's big. That's a big promise they just made there, because they made these boss fights sound like, Final Fantasy 16, those like godlike boss fights. Those are kind of like the best boss fights I've ever seen in the game. I doubt this game's gonna match it, and that is the thing that worries me, right? Because combat is gonna be so important. You're gonna be doing it all the time. That can hold the game back, even if everything else is good. So we'll see. Like I'm not willing to write it off completely. I do think it doesn't look good, but that doesn't mean it's actually not going to be good. And then just to quickly throw in like the battle pass stuff. Yeah, no, I'm not a fan. I mean, I'm not a huge live service person myself. I guess it just depends on how they do it. Honestly, like we'll just have to see. It's tough to like the biggest thing with live service games in a game like this, I would say, at launch, right, is you better give us a full product. And that is where I'm at. I'll judge how they update it. If there's predatory things with like cosmetics, 3 months down the line, like we will get there, okay? And I'll cover it and I'll talk about it. We'll get there. But at launch, the thing that matters to me is I don't care what you should have a plan, I guess, for like a year out, considering you want to be around in a year. So you should have that. But when you release, all I care about for pretty much any game, you better give us that full game. So like we're paying for this. It's a full game at launch. It better be a full thing. It better not feel like they split it up multiple times and they'll deliver the rest of it through a DLC thing that's live service, so it's going to have a battle pass and all this garbage, right? Like, and maybe it's not garbage, but if you start it like that, if you start it where you're not giving the full product day one, then I'm going to have that mentality, kind of going forward, right? So that's where I'm at. I guess if you're wondering, well, Alex, what do you think about the live service stuff? Just come out with a full game and we'll see how it plays. We'll see how fun it is. We'll see if it's meant to last. We'll see if it actually does last. And then we'll see what they do 2, 3, 4, 5 months down the line, right? That'll be after. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Make sure you're subscribed, bell icon turned on, and I hope to see you all on the next one.